I'm going to show you the steps for you to create your own foliage wreath this Christmas. It's a really simple design, but there's a couple of really key things that I'm excited to share with you. They're going to help make sure that your design goes from being okay to something that looks incredibly professional. Now, the base of the wreath is this frame that I created using between 4 and 5 hazel branches. When they are still new, so when they're green and it means that they're sort of more bendable, I've sort of bent them into a circular shape, and I've simply secured that with a series of loops of paper covered wire. Now you can do exactly the same using garden twine. It doesn't have to be paper covered wire. Anything that is going to secure the branches into shape. And you're looking for a sort of a rough circle. It doesn't need to be exact. This is slightly sort of askew, and it's going to be absolutely fine for what we need it for. Then the next step. Now again, you can use paper cover wire, or you can use garden twine. I happen to have a roll of real wire, or it's also known as paddle wire. And it's a very amenable floristry wire that comes on a nice reel. And I just find that it holds onto the greenery a little bit more firmly than garden twine does. But practice, you may find it much easier to work with garden twine. So once I've got that completely secure on, I'm going to place that out of the way, and then I'm going to start building my first pile of foliage. So I have got in front of me a mixture of buxus, and we've got some spruce, different kinds of firs. We've got cypress, we've got conifers, and also some really beautiful asparagus fern. Now, you don't need to have exactly this kind of greenery. As long as it's a really good mixture of hardy greenery, so greenery that's going to last really well outside of water. For example, it could be an amazing mix of eucalyptus, or maybe it's different kinds of pine or fir or different kinds of conifer. It doesn't matter. You're just looking for a really good mix between the sizes of the leaves. So some stems where they're quite delicate and fine, and then some slightly larger leaves as well. And then definitely some of the conifer and the spruce, so you get that really traditional Christmas feel in the design. Creating the first foliage pile. So I'm starting with a piece of spruce, and then I'm going to add some of the cypress. And what I'm looking to create is a fan. So the front section is much narrower, and then the greenery fans out, almost like in a triangular shape. But there is another key to doing this. As you're doing this, you want to make sure that the bit for the sections of greenery that are inside, so i.e. the bits that are going to be placed on top of the base, the sections that come inside the wreath as opposed to on the outside, you want those to be a little bit shorter. So you end up with a little bit of a fan that's kind of sort of skewed, so longer here and shorter there. It means that as you start building the wreath, that every section is really beautifully covered. And be quite generous with the number of stems that you use. Don't be conservative. You can be really quite bold with the different number of stems that you're using. So here, for example, I have about 8 or so stems. Once I've got that bundle in my hand, I'm then going to place this bind point here, directly on top of where the wire is secured onto the frame. And holding onto that, I'm then just going to wind it round. So one wrap to start off with, and then a second one to make sure that it's absolutely secure. So you can see here, I've got the smaller sections are sort of placed on the inside of the frame. They're beginning to come into the center. And then the longer sections are then fanning out beautifully. So you can see how big the wreath is going to end up already. So just to give sort of an idea of the beginning of the shape. And then the second bundle of greenery. And I try and mix it up each time. So you don't want every bundle to be absolutely identical. It's really good to have a variety and a real sort of mixture through all of the different stems and the greenery that you're using. And if there are any stems that are a little bit longer, just simply cut those ones away. So again, I've got my fan shape and I've got the slightly shorter section and then the longer sections coming out. So where I'm going to place the second bundle is directly on top of this bind point. This is a little bit unsightly and I want to make sure that that is completely covered. So placing it down in the same way as the previous one. So I've got the stems coming out and then the shorter stems on the inside. And wrapping it around twice. Sometimes you may find you just need to wrap it around the once. But for good measure and good luck, I'm going to do it twice. And then onto the third. Bundle and varying it again. Making sure that I've got a really lovely variety of different stems coming through. Again, the fan shape, the longer stems and then the shorter stems. And again, I'm placing it so I'm covering that bind point. Taking the real wire around. And again, twice. And I continue repeating, again, gathering different greenery together. Now, this design, the classic use for this design is on your front door. And the point of it is to welcome guests when they arrive at your home over the festive period. Now, this Christmas is a little bit different this year. So you may not have as many guests coming. And if that is the case, then this design can still be certainly added to your door. But as an alternative, you can use this as a table design. So it can be placed directly in the centre of your table, particularly if you've got a round one. And perhaps with a candle in the centre, a candle inside a hurricane vase, so you're protecting the leaves from the open flame. And it creates a really beautiful, simplistic design for your table. And perhaps you can alternate it, so it can be on your door, but you can then remove it and place it on the table when you're having your Christmas lunch or dinner. It's quite fun having designs that have sort of multiple use. And then, again, just repeating. And you may find that you have enough greenery in your garden. If that's not the case, then you can certainly speak to your local florist who will be able to help you with so many different varieties of greenery. Or perhaps you're lucky enough to live quite close to a market where there will certainly be abundance of seasonal greenery just now at the markets. Perhaps you've never been to a market before and it's a really good excuse to go and have a look and to see what's available. Now, I'm not including anything that is sort of non-hardy in this design because there's no access to water and we're not using a moss base, which is quite traditional for wreaths. So just make sure that when you're creating this design that you're just using sort of the hardiest stems. Now, I've just created this one. I've just gone to put it down. And interestingly, I sort of feel that there's a little bit too much of the blue spruce going on. I want to make sure that there's a bit more of a mixture. So I'm just going to remove that one and bring in maybe just some buxus this time, just to vary it. Making sure that I've got that sort of good stagger between the different greenery. You can sort of see now that just looks more interesting. That's the sort of the key to these kind of designs, is to create something that looks really interesting and different. And you're sort of focusing on a really good mixture through the whole of the wreath. It's rather beautiful, all this different greenery. This one in particular, the asparagus fern, is so dainty and delicate. I love the way that it moves. It's almost sort of cloud-like. And again, sort of making sure that I've got a good length on the right-hand side and then shorter pieces on the left, on the inside of the wreath. I'm not quite halfway around, but I'm sort of getting there. And already you can see the circular shape and just that sort of amazing mixture of the different colours of green. I often, if you think about the colour green, you sort of have that sort of one sort of classic colour in mind, but it's always surprises me how many different varieties of one particular colour there is. And green often can be considered as something sort of quite dull in floristry because it's relatively sort of one-dimensional, but it's absolutely not. You look at all these different colours that we've got here, there's sort of blues and there's sort of almost sort of yellow tones coming through as well. There's just a stunning, stunning mixture of different tones and different sort of feels. And I think bringing that into floristry, into your designs, is just so, it's really rewarding. It just sort of makes your design really special. And as I'm pulling the wire around and secure it in place, I'm being really firm. So one of the reasons why I don't use garden twine is I found, as I was pulling the garden twine, I'd often snap it. Whereas I find that with the wire that I'm using, it doesn't snap. Now, you might be way more delicate, more gentle than I am, and work sort of wonders with garden twine. Again, just keep on sort of practicing and seeing what works best for you. Kind of the same thing with cooking. It's sort of taking a recipe and then making it your own. I always think that's much more satisfying. When you sort of begin to follow some of the methods or some of the rules, but then mix it up a little bit. Try adding different ingredients in, try using different mechanics, see what sort of works best for you. I'm a great one for breaking rules. I think in design, that's really important. It also sort of helps you find your own style. It might be that you thought you loved really neat designs, but actually when you start creating, you sort of discover there's a real wild side to you. And you begin to love creating designs that are a little bit more dramatic. So experiment and have a play. And the other wonderful thing about creating these kind of designs is just how therapeutic they are. Because they definitely require concentration. And it's sort of that moment where you're sort of taken away from everything else that's going on in the world. And it just gives you an opportunity for a bit of escapism. Working with your hands, using natural ingredients, and then creating something that is really, it's really beautiful and something that you can feel incredibly proud of. And then something that other people can really enjoy. I think floristry is really amazing for that. It's definitely one of the reasons why I love it so much. I'm just probably at my happiest when I sort of quietly in the studio and just sort of creating designs, whether it's a vase arrangement or something sort of more detailed like this. It's most definitely where I'm in my happy place. So this bit that I discarded earlier, I'm going to bring it back into the design again. it's fun. As I'm sort of picking up the different ingredients, I keep on thinking, well, this is my favourite bit. Oh, I love the asparagus fern, or I love the buxus. And I think it's the mix of everything together that I love so much. And you can see also that it's not complicated. It's not something that requires years of experience to be able to achieve. And I hope what I really, really want to do is I want to show as many people as possible actually how easy and enjoyable floristry is. I get so many messages from people who said, oh, I've always wanted to be a florist, or I've always wanted to arrange with flowers. And when they realise that they can, it's just wonderful sort of hearing the enjoyment. I find that really satisfying. So again, just not forgetting, it's sort of keeping the longer stems on the outside of the wreath and then the shorter stems on the inside. If you weren't to include the shorter stems on the inside, you can see here it's a really good example of why it's important to make sure you've got the shorter stems on the inside. So if I was just focusing on the outside of the fan, you would sort of begin to build up. I'll show you this here. A wreath that looks really beautiful sort of from the outside, but the inside looks pretty ugly when you begin to see all these loose ends. Hence why it's really important to make sure that the fan comes out. But also, if you were to suddenly have much larger pieces going on the inside, I show you here. It's very well me saying this is how you should do it, but unless you understand exactly why, sometimes it's more difficult to do it. So say this is a sort of fan, almost sort of equal measure with long sections. If I was to place that there and I carried on, you can imagine that would really build up and the whole of the inside of the wreath would be sort of disappear over time. So you'd sort of have this rather wonderful sort of circular design, but you would certainly miss the inside. And it's key to keep that open so you've got that beautiful circle shape, focusing on the diameter of it. So just reshuffling this and making sure I've got those shorter stems. I often, when I'm learning how to do something, I find it really important to understand why you shouldn't be doing something, almost as important as why you should do something. I'm always sort of full of questions and wonder. And also sometimes if it doesn't make sense to you, test it. See why. Try doing it in a slightly different way, and perhaps it's a clearer way of then understanding. And this here is looking sort of wild and pretty, but there's a bit of a gap, so I've got a sort of a bushy section here, but then it kind of goes off without anything in between. So I'm just looking for some stems that are going to help close that gap a little bit and sort of make sure that the whole bunch is a bit more connected. And you can see that this, by adding this stem here, is beginning to do that. And just need another couple of stems to bring that together a little bit more. And then perhaps just one at the back. So that looks more sort of gradual. I didn't have just the bunch and then the extended sections. It looks a little bit more considered. Now I've got this sort of one asparagus fern that's gone a little bit skew with, and it's fine to have a couple of lighter stems that come into the centre. Don't worry too much about that. You just don't want to have a bulk of the stems coming into the centre, so you're really closing up the inner circle. This is now looking really fabulous with all of the greenery coming together. I love when you get to the end. It's almost like sort of creating a jigsaw. You know, you've got that sort of final piece that you put into place. And it kind of clicks and slots into position, and that's the design then finished. So we're beginning to come to the end, so not quite yet. So what I'm doing now, I'm just being really careful that the very first section is sort of clearly out of the way, so I'm not going to bind that down. So I'm just lifting that up gently and placing this one down. And I'm also being really careful when I bring the wire around. I don't want to pull any of this original foliage in. I want to make sure that's all sort of left out. So just making sure that hasn't been caught. And then binding it round. Make sure you don't get your fingers caught in the wire as you're pulling it really tight, because that could be incredibly painful. So it's very, very nearly finished. I think it probably just needs one more bunch. Quite often I say that and then I discover it actually needs another couple. But we'll see once we've added this. And just sort of working out what's going to be a good last mix for this bunch. And again, being really careful with that section. And placing it sort of underneath. So what I've done here, if I pull these up, you can just see sort of the last bit of the base visible there. And I'm just placing these last stems underneath, so pushing them underneath that very first bunch. You want to get this seamless feel all the way through the wreath, so you can't tell where it started and where it began. And exactly like last time, I'm being really careful that I'm not catching any of the original greenery, making sure that that's clear. And I've just placed that down on top, and it's because the stems are underneath the first one, they're being held temporarily in place, just whilst I'm binding it. Just again, making sure that the inside is covered. And I'm going to bind it around once more. Again, just making sure that I am not catching any of that original foliage. And making sure that it's really tight. And then taking a sort of a step back and just making sure that that is absolutely seamless and that it doesn't look like this is the section where I began and ended. And once I'm happy with that, I'm then going to turn the wreath upside down. It'll be absolutely fine to do that. Nothing's going to be damaged. And you can see the rather beautiful hazel base on the back here. And then I'm just going to cut the wire at this stage. I'm cutting it sort of a decent length. And then I'm simply just going to poke it through the stems, pulling it tight, poking it through again, making sure that that's caught and snug. And then once more, and this time I'm going to tie a knot with it. And then a final time, just to make sure it's absolutely secure and it's not going to go anywhere. And I'm going to keep the end bit quite long, because just in case it was to slip, it means that that's not going to disappear and the whole thing is then going to unravel. And I'm simply just going to tuck that behind. And the very final step is creating a twine loop that you can then use to hang on the door. So what I've done is I've just cut a section of garden twine, and I'm going to form a loop by creating a single knot with both ends, pulling that tight, so I've then got a loop. And I'm then going to place the twine between the branches. And just loop it through there. And now that can be used to hang the wreath on my door. And here's the finished design. I really hope this inspires you to get outdoors, have a look at so many different types of greenery and create your own foliage wreath this Christmas.